Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I hope you had a nice long weekend. Here we are in the middle of the second week of July, which I cannot even believe. And apropos of the PAGA reform, Private Attorney General's Act reform that we have seen over the last couple of weeks, the two laws that Governor Newsom signed, we are going to talk about itemized wage statements. Wage statement penalties have been a big part of the PAGA story, if you will, for employers. And the wage statements are actually pretty complicated for a couple of reasons. Now, remember, the wage statement is that tear-off portion of the paycheck. So if somebody has a direct deposit or if they just get that little, their actual check, the little tear-off part is the itemized wage statement. And there are a couple of provisions in the California Labor Code that impose some pretty specific requirements on the wage statements, what information must be included. Now, before we talk about those, I want to say that this is another one of those areas where employers really need to be aware of the vendors they are using. Many of these large payroll companies, and small for that matter, they don't understand the requirements and they're not going to print the wage statements the way they are supposed to print them. They're not including the right information. They're not making sure, for example, that the overtime rate is shown as 1.5 times the regular rate of pay. Many payroll companies tend to just show that as an additional 0.5, which sounds like it should be the same, but it isn't. So remember, we talked last week about a number of different things that come up in terms of PAGA compliance. And when you are calculating overtime, you have to calculate it based on the regular rate of pay, not the employee's base rate. If the employee receives any additional compensation, their base rate is going to be different than their regular rate of pay, which includes all of that other compensation. So on the wage statement, there are a number of opportunities for mistakes. And because of this PAGA reform, getting your wage statement right, making sure your wage hour house is in order is particularly important, because now there are all sorts of defenses you're going to be able to take advantage of and ways to avoid the significant penalties that so many employers have been paying. I mean, the PAGA gravy train is over, right? It's not going to work the way it has worked for these last several years since 2004. So, for the wage statement, what I want you to think about are two particular provisions of the Labor Code. The first one is Labor Code Section 212, which imposes a couple of requirements. One is that the paycheck be able to be cashed, what we call without discount, without a fee, in a bank in the state of California. So you have to be sure that the bank where the check is issued will cash that check without a fee, and that information should be on the itemized wage statement. The other thing that Labor Code Section 212 does is require that you have the proper name of the employer on the wage statement. And one of the things that has been so frustrating about PAGA is that an employee could win a claim if, for example, the name of your company was Acme, Inc., and the wage statement just said Acme. Now, the employees know who they work for, right? The employees understand that Acme Inc. is Acme, but they could pursue a claim for that, and they could win if the name of that company wasn't correct. It's probably not going to be that easy to win after the new PAGA laws were enacted last week, but you still need to make sure you've got the proper name of your company. So whatever your legal name is, make sure you've got that name on your wage statement. Now, the other thing you have to make sure of is that you're complying with Labor Code Section 226, okay? And Labor Code Section 226 lists a bunch of different provisions or requirements that you have to include in the wage statement. So for example, the gross wages that were earned before deduction, the total hours worked by the employee, but only if they're non-exempt, right? If they're an exempt employee, don't let your payroll company give you, 83.33 hours as an average for your exempt employees. There should be no hours worked for your exempt employees. If you're paying on a piece rate basis, you're going to have to show the number of piece rate units earned and then the applicable piece rate, what you're actually paying per piece. All deductions, so whatever deductions are being made, either because they're required by law or because the employee has asked for those deductions. And then, of course, the net wages, which are the gross wages minus those deductions. The actual inclusive dates of the pay period, the name of the employee, and the last 4 digits of their Social Security number or another employee identification number. Remember, you cannot put the full Social Security number on that statement. Labor Code Section 226 also requires, as I mentioned earlier, that you list the legal entity that is the employer and the address. And if you're a farm labor contractor, you have to list also the name and address of the legal entities that secured the services of the employer. All applicable hourly rates that were in effect and the corresponding number of hours worked at each hourly rate. So for non-exempt employees, if you're paying, for example, a travel time rate or a different rate of pay for a different day of the week, you're going to have those all broken out. Now, the thing that's important here is that you need to be sure that employees have access to their itemized wage statements. They have the ability to inspect them or receive a copy of them. That's important. Remember, for payroll record requests, you have 21 days to respond to those requests from the date of the request. And remember that the penalty for an itemized wage statement violation is up to $4,000 per employee. Now, with the new PAGA reform, what the employees are not going to be able to do is bootstrap a wage statement violation to a failure, for example, to pay the proper overtime rate or to pay a rest break or meal period premium. So we are seeing some changes there that are going to be reflected. The other thing that is required on your wage statement in California is the number of sick hours that the employee has available to them. Sick hours meaning California Healthy Families, Healthy Workplaces sick leave or sick time, okay? So there are a number of requirements that you need to satisfy on your wage statement. So what I want you to do as a result of this podcast is go look at your wage statements. There is a place on the DIR's website, the Department of Industrial Relations. If you go to the DIR's website, www.dir.ca.gov, and you put in sample wage statement, you will see that they have a sample there for you, and they will show you exactly what your wage statement is supposed to look like. Now, if you think there is a problem with your wage statement, you want to make sure that you, first of all, check with your employment law counsel, because there may not be a problem, but definitely check that out. And then if you see that there is a problem, you want to make sure you're dealing with your payroll company if you outsource that payroll. And what they may tell you is, well, we can't do it another way. We can only show overtime as the 0.5 additional. We can't show it as 1.5 times the regular hourly rate. Then you need a different payroll company. You need to hold them accountable to the requirements. So this is why when we talk about how to use your vendors, whether you're talking about a payroll company, a leave of absence administration company, a temporary services agency, whatever you're doing, you want to make sure that you are choosing a vendor that knows how to get it done properly. Because what you will notice when you read the agreements that these vendors want you to sign is they are not going to what's called indemnify you. They are not going to pay for some judgment or some verdict against you for a mistake that they made. It's incumbent on you as the employer to make sure that they have done what they're supposed to do with those wage statements. So it's really important to take a look at all of the requirements in Labor Code Section 212 and Labor Code Section 226. Make sure you really understand what you're supposed to be doing. Take a hard look at your wage statements. Make sure you look at one for an exempt employee, one for a non-exempt employee, and one for any employee who may be receiving more than one rate of pay. So again, that may come because they're getting a shift differential or a bonus or something of the sort. Okay? So you can't just look at one of your wage statements to decide if you're compliant. You're going to have to look at each group of employees and make sure that you are paying them appropriately. Okay? And the other thing to remember about these wage statements is that if you are in a situation when you are letting somebody go or they have quit and you can't give them the wage statement, the courts have said that's okay as long as it's provided in that next pay period. So if for some reason you can't do it, that's okay, but we would prefer that you do. If it's possible for you to run that final paycheck, either for direct deposit if the employer requests that at the time of separation, or you get your payroll company to overnight you a check, whatever you need to do. I know it may cost a little bit extra to do that separate payroll run, but it is very important that you get it right. One of the reasons is because a good eye, somebody who has sued a lot of employers for wage hour issues, will be able to look at a wage statement right away and identify what the problems are. So it's really important that the wage statement passes the smell test and that you don't get anyone interested in suing the organization because it's obvious that the wage statement is not in compliance. One other thing I want to mention here related to wage statements, but it also is related to other personnel records. If you are doing everything online, if you are making these wage statements available to employees through a portal, something of the sort, remember that the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement, that's our California Labor Commissioner, right? The equivalent of the Fair Labor Standards Board, okay? The Department of Labor federally. What you want to do is you want to make sure that your employees have access to those wage statements. That includes having a printer available for them if they want to print them. You cannot make it only available on their telephone unless you are paying for the telephone, all right? So remember, when we get into these issues of reimbursement, if you're going to say all of our records are online and you can access them from your mobile phone, well, then you're going to have to pay for that access unless they have another option. So wage statements are very important when you're looking at compliance with PAGA and the Labor Code to make sure that everything is sort of neatly put on the wage statement. And if you can't explain what a category means or you don't know how a number was arrived at, then your employees are not going to be able to figure that out either. So you need to take a step back and really look at your wage statement from an objective perspective. Is there anything vague? Is there anything ambiguous? Is there anything that doesn't make sense? If so, you're going to want to get that fixed right away. The sooner the better, okay? The final thing about wage statements is I want you to remember that when you get a demand letter or a records request from a law firm, many times they will ask you for payroll records to include schedules, payroll punch reports, exception reports. The only thing you are obligated to provide them under Labor Code Section 226 are those itemized wage statements. So those are the documents you're going to be giving to the lawyer or to the employee when they are requested. So that is why we want to make sure that on first glance, they look like they are compliant. All right. I know it was a little bit of a niche topic, but it's something I want you all to focus on, particularly with these changes we're seeing to PAGA. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.